I'd love to see more storytelling animation. I'd love to see more short films, more feature films, but I just want to see like more stories from here told by people from here.
Welcome to the Pixel Paper Podcast, a series where we get to know the creative processes behind up-and-coming digital artists. My name is Noor, graphic designer and work-in-progress artist, and I'll be your host for this series. Today's guest talks about her passion for animation, which determined the course of her career. Maryam Moustafa is our first guest from the Middle East who describes how her love for the industry stemmed Maryam Moustafa is our first guest from the Middle East who describes how her love for the animation industry stemmed from an early age when she was dead set on becoming an animator. We spoke about how the animation scene in the Middle East is still in its infancy and what gaps there are in the creative industries in this region. In fact, I think Maryam's story and her persistence is in and of itself very inspiring and sounds somewhat like the start of a hero story. To find out more about animation, interactive design, and freelancing in the Middle East, please enjoy this episode with Maryam Moustafa. All right. Hi, Maryam. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. For the benefit of our audience, can you please introduce yourself?
My name's Maryam Moustafa. I'm an Egyptian animator / illustrator working in Dubai.
Great. And I really wanted to interview you because you have a very strong animation portfolio and you have a lot of different types of work. So can you please tell us about your art journey?
Sure. So my art journey starts really long time ago. Like I always knew I wanted to be an animator. Like when I was 13, my mom bought me this animation program. It's called Toon Boom Studio. That doesn't exist anymore. It's called Toon Boom Harmony nowadays. And that was really like how it started for me. Like I would do like little music videos and they were not good at all, but like I knew I was kind of like in love with the process. So I studied in American University of Sharjah. I studied multimedia design, and and as the major suggests, it's like everything. It's interactive design, photography, film, animation, all of it. And I did a concentration in animation and illustration. So that's sort of like the best I could do within the region because animation isn't really like a big field here. So yeah, and then once I graduated, I interned at Cartoon Network. I interned at Image Nation Abu Dhabi. I worked at a design agency as an animator. I worked in TV as an animator. But after all that, I decided like the best thing for me really was freelancing because I just really love trying different things and I love having the opportunity to take every project and then learn something new. You know, when you have a full-time job, you kind of at a certain point you start to do the same thing over and over and over again. So that's kind of where the variety of work comes from. It didn't really begin to grow like that until I became a freelancer. So yeah.
Wow, that's a really interesting career. I mean, I love that it started from such a young age, like you knew exactly what you wanted to do because that's
Yeah.
quite rare.
Well, actually, I thought a lot of artists were like that. Like, you know, a lot of designers and just people in the art field kind of feel like they gravitated that way ever since they were young. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But I feel like I've never heard someone say, I wanted to do animation since I was a kid. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. I feel lucky in that sense. And also like my mom was a great support when she like that program, I cannot emphasize how much like it broadened my horizons when I was just 13. So yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And you said that you studied multimedia design, which obviously encompasses a lot of different fields. So do you think that it's better to be a jack of all trades or kind of a master of one?
Yeah. So honestly, like my whole life I wanted to be a master of one. I wanted to just be an animator. But because when I went to university, I didn't go to an animation major. I didn't get enough courses in animation alone to be truly a master. So it's kind of out of necessity that I had to be the jack of all trades. So it wasn't really a choice for me. But that being said, I do feel like it's helped me a lot, especially in the freelance field, because when you're freelancing, you kind of have to be flexible and you are your own boss and you are the whole team. So kind of knowing a lot of everything, it's super handy. So I'm kind of grateful for it now, even though I've always just wanted to be, specialized in one thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why I'm asking this question is because when I was job hunting, when I was a graduate and stuff like that, you always get the advice kind of specialize your portfolio and don't put in too much work and don't put
Yeah.
in a variety. So, what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that?
Well, it really depends what your objective is. If you're applying to like established companies, people who are looking to build teams, definitely being specialized is kind of what the employer would be looking for. But if you're kind of applying to either smaller companies, which is what's more prevalent here in the Middle East, people are looking for the whole package. They're looking for someone who can take a project from A to Z. So they want to see that you can do a lot of things. So, and also, if you're planning to be a freelancer, definitely showcase that you are a versatile being. So, yeah, there isn't really one right way. It's just what the person is aiming to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And seeing as you just touched on the Middle East, I mean, you're the first person from the Middle East that we've had on this podcast. So you did mention earlier that the animation industry is still a relatively new thing here. So how do
Yeah.
you think animation is contributing to the design scene in the Middle East?
Well, I'm definitely seeing a growth in the field. Like there's a new animation feature coming up. It's called Cats Away. And it's like the first 2D animated film from the UAE. There was also like an animated series called Imada. I would suggest you look it up. It's really amazing. And it's like an independent kind of production. So I'm seeing a lot more like, and I'm talking about the kind of animation that's on par with international animation because there is obviously animation here. It's just not very strong. And people don't appreciate, like, they don't have the vocabulary or like the understanding to appreciate the difference between a really well made animation versus something that's more commercial. So it's growing, it's just not happening fast enough. And unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of like art director who wants to art direct an animation, but not enough animators who want to be animators. And honestly, I think it's because they're not given the chance. Like, so productions like these, they often get outsourced. So, like, you'll have a Middle Eastern directing team, but the actual execution gets outsourced. So the talent here isn't being fostered enough. So the growth is really, really slow. Yeah.
So do you think that for you personally, that's an advantage or a disadvantage?
It is an advantage right now because I'm working alone, and so kind of being able to sell that to a client and be like, oh, I can do this and I can do that, and I know that they won't be able to find too many alternatives. Obviously, that gives me like a competitive advantage. But at the same time, like, when my ultimate goal is not to just be a freelancer my whole life. I'd love to start at my own studio, and to do that, I need to be in contact with other talent, and other talent needs to also grow. just I just want to be able to like foster all the talent that comes from here and stop it from just kind of escaping outside or just dying off. So yeah.
I guess you also have that network from your university, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's sad because even though I had classmates in my animation program as well, but none of them are actually pursuing animation exactly because of this problem. A lot of them ended up going into graphic design or even social media roles because there isn't that much demand for animators here. So yeah.
That's interesting. So what made you push through, despite the challenges?
I guess because I always knew, like, maybe because I just had that from when I was young. I feel so disappointed to like come all this way and then just change courses because I couldn't find anything.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, when you were applying for jobs, did you have any difficulties? when you're
Yeah.
applying?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was first graduated, I focused on applying for like established animation companies, and Cartoon Network was one of them. I got an internship there, but eventually they told me that they don't do any of their productions in-house. They get it all done in like Singapore. So they were like, "We'd love to keep you, but we can't. There's no work for you here." So yeah, it's challenging. Eventually, I had to go down the motion graphic route, which is a little bit different from animation. It's not character based, it's like, more graphical. So and that is in demand. People do want to see more of that. So that's kind of what I had to do at the beginning to make ends meet for a while.
So that's why you have such a mix of stuff on your
Absolutely.
website.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
right. That's interesting. So I'm assuming like when you're doing animations, you collaborate a lot, right?
Well, back when I was working at a design agency, yes, it was rare that I would do a project completely on my own. But the collaboration would be less in the animation part and more in like the pre-production and the ideation. We'd like gather up in a room and everyone would start pitching ideas. We'd draw up like a mood board, and all that stuff. So that's kind of a lot of where the collaboration for me personally comes from. Traditionally, though, um, if you were in a bigger animation company, the whole pipeline would be divided to different people because animation is like a linear process. So you'd have like the storyboard artist, the script writer, the layout artist, the style frames, and then you'd have like a handful of animators all working together, different scenes, have the post-production team. So I've personally never had the chance to be in that sort of pipeline. I've always had to take things from beginning to end, only really sharing the ideation process with other people. But it's been unfortunate, but it's something I look forward on doing more in the future. Yeah.
Interesting. And I mean, this is something that I'm just personally curious about because when I was watching your animations, I noticed there's obviously a lot of sound design that goes into them as well. So, do you create the sounds yourself or do you collaborate with
Yeah,
sound
actually,
artists?
this recently has been like a newfound passion. Like, I don't know if you know of
Ah,
the term Foley sound.
no.
That's so Foley sound is when basically someone is sitting in a room and just grabbing random items to mimic the sound that's happening on screen. So I had this animation not too long ago of this bird, and I needed wing flapping sound. And obviously there are online stock sounds, but none of them that matched, and some of them just sounded awful. So I just remember like running around the house, flapping different things around. And eventually, I found like this coaster that was made out of leather, and it sounded exactly like a wing. So it's so I don't know. It forces you to think out the box, and it's really exciting. It's a whole new field for me, and I've been enjoying it.
Wow, that's amazing. And what about the music for your
Yeah,
videos?
so music, I tend to just use like stock music, but I edit it a little bit so that it works with the animation. But as of recently, I started to like get in contact with sound design people, but they specialize in motion graphic sound, which is like a whole new genre. So yeah, hopefully you'll be seeing more projects that have like professionally made sound. So yeah,
Wow, that's amazing.
thank you.
And in your work as well, you do interactive installations, which I think is super cool and it's quite unique as well. I mean, for example, on your website, you have the rough tree or you
Yeah.
have the jewelry making exhibit. And I think it would be really interesting for our listeners to understand the process that goes behind making this. So, could you explain more about that?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, these interactive design projects happened when I was in university. Some of them were actually used, some of them were just, conceptual and like an exercise. So the one that was actually used is the jewelry making one. This was actually in a proper exhibition. And really, I would say like the best thing about interactive design is seeing it in action when people get in, interact with it. It's kind of like an amazing feeling. You kind of don't get that when you are showing a video to someone through a link. It's not the same as when someone's like actually interacting with your work. It's an amazing feeling. And like about the pipeline, I would say the most important part of it is like the conceptual beginning, because all interactive installations have a purpose. None of them are just for entertainment. There's always like, this is to raise awareness about that, or this is to inform them about this. So once you have purpose set down, you really need to like research it and find out everything you can about it. Why are people not interested in it? And then you
Could
build
you
around it.
explain that in the context of the jewelry making? Like,
Yeah,
could you explain
so
more about it? Yeah.
yeah, so our task was to inform about the different crafts found in the Middle, not just in the Middle East, in the UAE specifically, like um, cultural heritage crafts, and ours was jewelry making. That was just assigned to us, and so we just had to look into, first of all, like what was jewelry making like back then, and then get in touch with professional jewelry makers who are still practicing the old tradition, using, the fishbone to make the cast and all that stuff. So once we've gathered that sort of like research and found out enough about it, that was when we were like, okay, how can we take that and make an installation out of it that people can interact with? And our process was like, the whole concept was supposed to happen within a tray. That was also a requirement of the assignment. So we were thinking to create like a workspace on top of that tray, kind of like the jewelry maker's workspace, and then have each element um, kind of describe what the process of jewelry making was like. And by the end of it, there was like an interactive knob on the side to switch between different items. And it was a lot. It was ages ago. But at the end of it, really, everyone who went ended up knowing a lot more about, jewelry making, and then appreciating it a lot more than if you were to just sit through, a 5-minute video telling you about it.
Yeah, true. That's true. Yeah, and do you think that this has a future in Dubai? Or
Absolutely.
in,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
Middle
yes,
East?
yes. I think because Dubai has that sort of like touristy vibe to it,
Yeah.
there's always room for these kind of installations, and they happen quite frequently in places like D3, Dubai Design Week and all that. You'll find some of these scattered around. So there is room for it, and actually there's a demand for it, but it's tough because I haven't seen anyone specialize in it. It's always like a small part of a program. It's never the program.
So that's
So
actually like a niche that's, you would say it's unexplored.
absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And what exactly was your role in the installation?
Well, I worked with just two other people, so the three of us did everything together. So there was a bit of rotoscoping. I worked on that, and just putting everything together, building the tray, programming like writing the code to work with the knob and to actually be interactive. So yeah, we all did a bit of everything, really.
Wow, I'm just realizing the depth of your skill set. Like, it's amazing.
Thank you.
Wow,
Uh,
okay, cool. And because you have such a wide depth of work, are there any specific fields you want to narrow down in the future?
uh, Honestly, my stubbornness is still trying to bring me down the road of animation. I want to just do animation. So I'm hoping that, the further down I go, the more animation based my portfolio will be, and you'll see less and less of other things. I'm hoping. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's one animation that's on your website called Boiled, I think. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
loved that. Could you
Oh,
explain
thank
some more
you.
about that?
That was actually my graduation project. So I've always wanted to make a frame by frame traditional style animation. And due to the like time constraint, I never get the chance to do it. Even now that I've graduated and worked, nobody has the time to wait for you to do a frame by frame animation. But yeah, I had a 2 months window. And I remember I was indoors literally for the whole 2 months. I was just sitting there animating, and it was the time of my life. I remember I was the happiest when I was working on Boiled. Yeah, and the story isn't super complicated. I had to keep it simple. It's about like uh, this cooking show. There's three contestants. They're in the semifinals, and Mary Sue, who's our protagonist, puts together a dish that was accidentally put together. Nothing on it was intentional, and she ends up winning. The point here was like a lot of artists have like this kind of, yeah, a bit of like an imposter syndrome. We all think like we're not really that good and someone's gonna eventually find out, and all of our work is just one big accident. I just got lucky that one time. So that's kind of where the idea comes from, that weird feeling. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really cool, actually. And I mean, have you done any other animations besides that one?
Yeah, since then I've done like so many, but I don't think I have done one that was frame by frame in the same way that I did Boiled. I have included frame by frame elements, like there's this mafia podcast that needed a trailer, so I did like a mafia trailer, and there were some parts of it that were done frame by frame, like a hat flying off or a picture frame falling down that was drawn traditionally, but the remaining had to be done using like computer graphics, After Effects, tweening, all that. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what kind of softwares do you use?
My best friend is After Effects, like that's the one I'm always using, but there's also Photoshop. Sometimes I still use Toon Boom, um, Premiere, really just the Adobe package. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And when you use After Effects, like, because I'm completely an animation noob, do you, when you're making, like, let's say an animation, if it's
Mhm.
not frame by frame, I'm assuming, do you use Illustrator or something?
Yeah, so the best workflow would be to have your elements done on Illustrator as vector files, separated onto layers. You import that into After Effects, and from there you have the capability to animate individually. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's obviously faster than frame by frame.
Absolutely, yeah. Because, like, imagine someone waving their arm on After Effects. I just have to set the keyframe for, the top position and then the bottom position, and it will do in between for me. But if I was animating it, I'd have to go, you know, the whole way, frame by frame, from top to bottom. So,
Right. So what's the benefit of frame by frame?
it's really charming. It's the kind of animation that people grew up watching, and it gives you
Right.
so much freedom in what you can draw, the perspectives, and it's an aesthetic that people really really appreciate. Like, even if they have no idea about animation, when they see something drawn frame by frame, it immediately wins them over, as opposed to like a computerly generated graphic kind of thing. Yeah.
True. True. No, I think that's true actually. Like even for example, if I post something on Instagram that's kind of more hand sketchy, people appreciate that more than like a
Yeah,
polished
exactly,
piece.
exactly. Yeah, that's a good comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of things that we liked during childhood, what were your inspirations, both growing up and now as well?
Ooh, growing up, unfortunately, I had a very narrow, like, room for inspiration. It was mostly anime. Like, I used to watch Space Tune, which was all like anime dubbed into Arabic, and that was like my childhood. I loved everything about it. And then as I got a little bit older, I started to, really appreciate more like Disney work, Ghibli work, all that stuff. So that's really where my inspiration comes from.
And what about now?
Now there is this university called Gobelin in France.
Ah,
Oh my gosh,
yes.
their work just yeah. Every time I watch one, I'm like, wow. So yeah.
As well, I wanted to kind of go back to the Middle Eastern aspect, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
You
Sure.
design in both Arabic and English, so I'm a non-Arabic speaker, so I'd like to know, are there any cultural differences or nuances when you're designing for both audiences?
Mm, I think if the content itself is, cultural in nature, then obviously I keep in mind the details, because nothing sucks more than seeing your culture misrepresented.
True.
So so I think that's mostly where I would say like the difference lies. But anywhere else, I try not to like discriminate, because truth is at the moment, the Arabic audiences, because they haven't seen a lot of animation really, they are more like lenient and they don't expect much. They're kind of okay with anything. So I don't want to like kind of play off of that. So I always just pretend that they're all the same audience to me.
Fair enough,
Yeah.
fair enough. And I mean, you're obviously working as a freelancer in the Middle East, which I think compared to the West is not as easy, I would say.
Oh,
So,
no,
so
no, it's definitely tougher, and
yeah,
it's actually more expensive. Like the barrier to entry is huge. You need to pay for so much yourself in order to be a freelancer. But if you can make it, the payoff is much better. Like the first of all, your income is higher actually, even though it may be
really,
more inconsistent, but each project is priced way better than if you were working in a company. But, obviously on the downside, everyone thinks freelancers code for unemployed, so there's still that stigma.
right, right, interesting.
Yeah.
And how do you price things? Like, is there a kind of a standard rate, or do you kind of price according to
Well,
client?
yeah, so there is a standard rate, like for myself, I have an hourly rate. And that rate is kind of informed by my just general experience of working in an agency and, my friends. You just kind of, before you become a freelancer, you kind of need to build that understanding of the market where everyone's at. And then obviously, after you have that base of like your hourly rate, you can then change it a little depending on your clientele. Obviously, if you have like a huge luxury client, you want to make the most of it. So,
Mm,
yeah.
right, right, right. And how do you find your clients?
When I first started, I was cold calling. I was just, picking up the phone.
Mm,
Hi, I'm a freelancer. I can offer you this and that. Are you interested? And there was a lot of busts from that, but
mm,
a lot of clients came from it as well. But from now, I've sort of like built a network and word of mouth spreads around and they just find me. So, yeah, I'm
mm.
grateful
And I
for
guess
that.
because you're such a niche in this region, it helps.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. And I think what would be really interesting to know from your perspective is where would you like this industry in particular to grow in the next few years in this region?
Festivals or online, they don't make it to the cinema, it's okay. But I just want to see like more stories from here told by people from here. So, yeah.
And where would you like to see yourself moving forward?
Myself, I'd love to run my own studio someday where I can foster the talent coming from here.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I hope that happens because, like, this really seems like a big gap that needs to be plugged.
Absolutely, yeah. Inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. And I think maybe this podcast episode is the step in the right direction to
I
get
hope
awareness.
so.
Yeah. Are there any final words that you'd like to say?
No, thank you so much for having me on. It's been great talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode with Mariam and you learned a thing or two, particularly about this really interesting animation scene in the Middle East. And hopefully, this episode is going to be a precursor for what's going to come, and we're going to reference this episode in a few years' time and think, wow, everything's changed so much. I mean, who knows, right? Anyways, you can check out the podcast on Instagram and Twitter at Pixel Paper Pod. And you can also follow on any podcast platform of your choice. Do remember that you can also read the article interviews on Medium as well as email subscribe on Substack. All of the links will be in the description of the podcast, and you can also find the specific links to Mariam or to the artist in the bio of each episode. And with that, I will see you next week for another episode on the Pixel Paper Podcast.